Hello, everyone out there. I will wait for people to trickle in, and then I feel like I must issue my official statement here on the rather incredible spectacle that we all witnessed, or at least I witnessed today at the White House. And this was incredible for a number of reasons. And I'll wait for people to trickle in before I get into the meat of it here. But if you have any comments, go to my YouTube, M Tracy at YouTube. This should also be on Substack at mtracy.net if that's working, hopefully. And then I also am on X. So this was bizarre from a number of reasons. And I'm going to begin by just taking what you would think the perspective or the approach of Zelensky would have been if he were engaging rationally in the situation. Okay? So trying to enhance or fortify or strengthen his position relative to his superior state in the power arrangement, which is the United States, now under the control of Trump. First, if you haven't, I would really recommend that you watch the entire 50 or so minutes of this press conference, because what was so striking is that for the first 40 minutes or so, it was a rather unremarkable meeting. There weren't particularly obvious signs of tension. And remember, Zelensky was there because he was getting ready to have a signing ceremony, we were told, with Trump, where they would ratify this bilateral arrangement whereby the United States would entrench itself ever more in Ukraine. So if you are wary of the United States entangling itself into Ukraine, or further entangling itself with Ukraine, then I think you should have looked seriously askance at this so-called minerals deal, which all the reporting had indicated, and which even Scott Bessent, who had been the point person, the Treasury Secretary, said yesterday, the deal is agreed to. All that's left are now just formalities. And one of those formalities was for Zelensky to show up at the White House, sit with Trump in the Oval Office, and have a short introductory briefing. And it obviously went incredibly haywire. So I'm going to pull up a clip of a compilation of clips that I made that I think illustrates some of the irony here, because you wouldn't know this if you didn't watch the entire event. But Trump actually, on several occasions, said that he would continue supplying arms to Ukraine. Now, 6 months ago, there would have been a lot of people, both pro-Ukraine and anti-Ukraine, who probably would have found it rather inconceivable that Trump would continue to arm Ukraine. Right? I mean, if you look at just characterizations of Trump's policy attitude toward Ukraine during the campaign last year, oftentimes it would be a reductive summation where he was dead set on just cutting off Ukraine from funding or weaponry. I never found that to be a particularly correct interpretation, but that was the interpretation that a lot of people had. And Trump has already kind of alluded to this, or even explicitly said it several times in the past, but here he is with Zelensky today, prior to the meltdown, reaffirming this explicitly, giving a direct, unambiguous verbal commitment that he will continue supplying arms to Ukraine. And to me, that's the most pressing and acute policy issue from Ukraine's perspective, or from Zelensky's perspective. Is the spigot going to continue to flow? Is the weaponry going to continue to be provisioned to Ukraine? Because without it, Ukraine can barely survive as a continuously existing state. And so let's just watch that.
Will you continue sending military aid to Ukraine after the U.S. signs this agreement with Ukraine?
Yeah, we're going to be continuing.
President Zelensky, do you feel like the U.S. is on your side? That President Trump is on your side at this moment?
What do you think?
He wants to know, do you think that, sort of a stupid question. I guess we wouldn't be here if I wasn't.
First of all, just to pause for a second, I'm not sure that Zelensky's comprehending a lot of what's being asked of him. Now, I'm not one to lecture anybody else about having a second language. I don't have a particularly fluent second language except for some extremely bare minimum Spanish. So I don't have a whole lot of standing to personally gloat on this issue. And I think for a non-native English speaker who learned the language a bit later in life, Zelensky is passable. But the language barrier does pose some problems. He's not using an interpreter here, it seems. And it seems like he didn't even comprehend this question. And then later on, when the flare-up happens, the language barrier becomes even more of a problem, because Zelensky is not going to be able to competently debate or even dialogue, really, in a heated, high-pressure situation in front of the cameras with the whole world watching. He's not going to be able to do that with Vance. That's obvious. So I think the language issue here was probably more pronounced than maybe people were comprehending. But let's just watch the remainder of this clip that I compiled.
I think that the United States on our side from the very beginning of occupation, and I think that President Trump on our side, and of course, I'm sure that the United States President will not stop support. This is crucial for us. It's important for us. Yes.
But are you going to send more arms to Ukraine in case there's no peace?
Yeah, we're going to have arms to Ukraine. Yeah, sure. Hopefully I won't have to send very much, because hopefully we're going to have it finished. We're looking forward to finishing this quickly. We're not looking forward to sending a lot of arms. We're looking forward to getting the war finished so we can do other things. But we very much appreciate the agreement, because we needed what they had, and we're treating, our country is now treated fairly. Biden didn't do that. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. This should have never happened. This should have never started. But, sure, the answer is yes, but hopefully we won't have to send much, because I'm looking forward to getting it done quickly, very quickly.
Okay, so there's Trump saying that U.S. supply of weaponry will in fact continue, and Trump is expressing an aspiration that it won't have to continue for that long, because there could be a peace settlement reached. But the achievement of a peace settlement is particularly contingent on what Russia wants, right? And Trump did have a phone call with Putin, and he did send Rubio and company to have a bilateral meeting with Russia in Riyadh. However, there are a lot of aspects to that potential settlement that it's not clear at all, to me anyway, that Russia would accept. Like, if Russia is currently has an advantage and it has not yet captured the territories which Putin has declared to be eternal parts of the Russian Federation, the 4 oblasts, then what real incentive does Putin have to just agree to a cessation of hostilities or a ceasefire at this juncture, particularly if that would be coupled with what Trump had endorsed this week, which was the deployment of a European so-called peacekeeping force, including French and British troops, to Ukraine. And those would be NATO troops. You can call them peacekeepers or you can call them whatever you'd like. It's kind of a euphemistic game. But those would be NATO troops deployed to Ukraine. And it seemed like Putin, if you go back and read his original rationale for launching the war in 2022, one of the reasons, it seemed, the central reasons was that the US and NATO were building up an infrastructure in Ukraine and turning it into like an outpost of Western antagonism toward Russia. So now maybe some settlement could be reached. Maybe some negotiations would still be on the menu that could compel Putin to agree to some fairly serious concessions. But that's still very much an open question. And so that was the context in which Zelensky was coming to this meeting. Number one, he has the framework set up for the deployment of NATO troops to Ukraine. Not Ukraine itself formally entering NATO, but you got to remember, Ukraine hasn't been formally in NATO for this entire war, and yet NATO has expended an enormous amount of resources on Ukraine. So Ukraine really kind of is a de facto NATO member, albeit with not the formal multilateral parliamentary approval that would actually make that an official status. And then, pursuant to some theoretical peace arrangement, what Trump and the Europeans had been talking about just this week, because Macron was in DC, Starmer from the UK was in DC yesterday, and they were both promoting this concept that Trump signed off on, it seemed, for the US to have for there to be this European / NATO troop deployment to Ukraine. So Zelensky had that, and then on top of that, he was there for what seemed like it was going to be just some pro forma diplomatic niceties in preparation for or directly precipitating him having like a pomp and circumstance signing ceremony with Trump, which you would think would be seen as a positive thing for bolstering the US-Ukraine relationship. And then it completely went off the rails. And here's the point at which it went off the rails, and we'll, I think, get a better sense of how exactly that happened. So this is 38 minutes into the 50-minute event that this happens.
Since I already mentioned Poland. Poland was under Russian control for decades after the Second World War. When I was a kid, I looked at the United States not only as a most powerful country, richest country in the world, the country that has great music, great movies, great muscle cars, but also as a force for good.
By the way, who is asking these stupid questions? Muscle cars? Like, who the hell is this guy? Anyway.
And now I'm talking with my friends in Poland, and they are worried that you align yourself too much with Putin. What's your message for them?
Well, if I didn't align myself with both of them, you'd never have a deal. You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, "Hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?" That doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough.
By the way, I too consider myself aligned with the world, so I agree with that.
For me to make a deal with that kind of hate, he's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough, but you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
Hey, I want to respond to this. So look.
So here's where it begins. But if you'll notice, JD Vance decides to interject, like in defense of Trump, in response to one of the media questioners. If you listen to what he goes on to say here, he's not even really challenging Zelensky, but as you'll see, Zelensky chooses to interject, which turns out to be a pretty catastrophic mistake on his part.
For 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the president of the United States' words mattered more than the president of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Okay, so we don't have to necessarily have to watch the entire rest of this because it gets worse and worse from here. But the point is, Zelensky is the one who interjected and then turned the meeting, which was winding down, into this debate that got increasingly heated. So all Zelensky had to do, again, if you're in favor of further entanglement or further entrenchment of the U.S. with Ukraine, then you should have been on the edge of your seat, hoping that Zelensky would just shut his mouth for another 5 minutes. And they would have proceeded to some private room for maybe some further talks and then eventually come out and sign this big bilateral so-called rare earths minerals deal, which again goes far beyond rare earth minerals. If you read the text, the U.S. would basically own a huge swath of all Ukrainian natural extractable resources, plus physical infrastructure in Ukraine, like ports and refineries. And so Trump was trying to sell this economic pact as itself a kind of de facto security guarantee, because it would entail Americans in some form being deployed to Ukraine, and then Russians wouldn't want to mess with them. And on top of that, you had the European willingness to send actual troops. So all Zelensky had to do was wait another 5 minutes, but then he interjects and instigates a debate with Vance that Zelensky was never going to win, if only because of the language barrier. I mean, I just watched Zelensky on Bret Baier, which he, kind of amazingly still appeared on this evening. And Zelensky has to go back and forth with his interpreter, who was there in the studio, because he didn't understand some of the questions. He had to ask his interpreter what the words regret and salvage mean. It's understandable for a non-native speaker. English is a complicated language, but the idea that you're going to initiate a debate in that kind of setting with JD Vance, who, if nothing else, is quite good on his feet, quite sharp. It was a mind-blowing choice for Zelensky. And maybe somebody gave him like bad political advice or something, because yesterday Trump was asked, do you apologize or something to that effect for calling Zelensky a dictator last week in your Truth Social post? And Trump kind of laughed it off as if he was willing to strategically withdraw that rather brash allegation because it had come out that Zelensky had indeed agreed to this so-called minerals deal, which I'm thinking I should actually ditch the term minerals deal, because that's not really what it even is. It's really a Ukrainian forfeiture of sovereignty to the United States deal. Because if one country takes over half or more, some undetermined, large amount of another country's natural resources, that's almost like, I don't know if you want to call it colonization or turn the country into a protectorate or dependency. Like, pick your nomenclature. It's not that particularly important. But the point is, it would have entailed a conjoining of the United States and Ukraine in a way that you would think, if Ukraine wants to be in the strongest quote unquote position with regard to Russia, they would want that, especially given the new administration and its different tendencies or sentiments compared with the previous one. So that was bizarre. And I think to some degree it was true last week that the Trump Truth Social post, where he uses the term dictator or whatever, that was a negotiating salvo. This, I don't know, because it seemed to go beyond that. It seemed to suggest that Zelensky just depleted his political capital. And you had even Lindsey Graham come out and basically castigate Zelensky. And Lindsey Graham is one of the last people that you would expect to do that. Of course, everything that Lindsey Graham does is basically calculated to stay in good standing with Trump and to try to ameliorate Trump and to try to mold things and craft things in a way that is most amenable to Trump. So, of course, that was probably a factor. But let's take a look at this, because it's hard to imagine a worse outcome for Zelensky. And again, I'm not even saying that I was rooting for Zelensky to achieve his favorite outcomes, right? I think that there are a lot of very perilous issues associated with having a de facto security guarantee with Ukraine. That has a long historical track record, the offering of security guarantees, of snowballing and actually bringing forth potentially further conflicts. So it's not like I personally, from my own standpoint, was really rooting for Zelensky to sign this deal. Like, I have been writing with some criticism about the nature of this deal. Let's talk about like what Zelensky would presumably have wanted to achieve and then screwed up royally. So here was Graham here. Let's go to this.
So, what did I think? Complete, utter disaster. I've been to Ukraine 8 or 9 times since the war started. I understand the consequences of Putin's actions against Ukraine. I appreciate what the Ukrainian people have done. They fought like tigers. At the end of the day, I was hoping that this minerals deal, which would be transformative in the relationship, would go over well. I talked to Zelensky this morning. Don't take the bait. President Trump was in a very good mood last night. Somebody asked me, am I embarrassed about Trump? I have never been more proud of the president. I was very proud of J.D. Vance standing up for our country. We want to be helpful. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again. I think most Americans saw a guy that they would not want to go in business with. The way he handled the meeting, the way he confronted the president was just over the top. So I think the relationship between Ukraine and America is important, vitally important. But can Zelensky do a deal with the United States? After what I saw, I don't know.
What would he need to do, sir? Senator Graham.
You just had lunch with President Trump. What did he say to you about his interactions and whether he thinks
He was shocked. He was very upbeat.
See, I don't necessarily think that Graham is just putting on a front here. I think there's a decent chance that what Trump actually was shocked. That's for other people in the administration. Because again, this was just supposed to be a pro forma meeting in the run-up to signing this sweeping state asset seizure bill or pact. Maybe that's a better term than minerals deal. But just as a shorthand, they're getting ready to sign this minerals deal, which ratified a, quote, long-term financing commitment by the U.S. to Ukraine. In exchange for, it would have seemed, the continuation of U.S. military supply. So I think maybe they were genuinely surprised that Zelensky came into this with the kind of embittered or aggressive attitude that he ended up doing.
I told Zelensky, we'll talk about security guarantees. We'll talk about ceasefires and how the war ends. This is a process. You have a new relationship with America, a $500 billion, $500 billion deal that President Trump is proud of, that gives us an interest worth defending. Let's talk about the positive. But he was terrible at Munich, Zelensky, and I think he has made it almost impossible to sell to the American people that he's a good investment, that he is a good business.
Last question. Senator Graham. Senator, a number of European... Hey, one at a time. One at a time. Christian Daytop. Senator Graham, thank you. Do you think President Zelensky needs to resign to resume these peace talks?
He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
Thank you.
So who knows what exactly the implications of that are? Meaning, Zelensky is saying that, or Graham is saying that Zelensky either needs to resign or change. I don't know how Zelensky would go about, quote unquote, changing at this point. Like, what does that mean? Issue a groveling apology? He was on Fox and he maybe kind of did that, but not, I think, in any way that would smooth over some of the fractures that happened today. And so would he resign? I think it's not inconceivable. But then if Zelensky were to resign, my understanding from the Ukrainian constitution is he would be replaced by the chairman, or basically the speaker of the Ukrainian Rada, so the legislature, who I followed a bit. His name is Stefanchuk. And he just seems to have basically identical views with Zelensky on the war, at least on the major issues. So maybe at this point, again, if you're like a pro-Ukrainian person, or you want there to be some, maybe pro-Ukrainian is not the right word. Like if you're a pro-Ukrainian war person, if that's your inclination, you should probably want, I don't know, it's hard to say. Maybe you should consider calling for Zelensky to, in fact, resign. Although then again, maybe that destabilizes Ukraine and Russia could perhaps take advantage of it and like increase their offensive operations, take over even more territory. So it's just a whole mess from that perspective. So yeah, if the end result of this meeting is even Lindsey Graham coming out and basically denouncing Zelensky, it's hard to see how much worse it could have gone. And I now want to go to Scott Bessent, who was basically like the point person in facilitating this deal, the minerals deal. And he gives his reaction to what went on today. And I tend to
Ukraine is at the top of everyone's mind right
believe
now.
him.
And particularly the deal that you were the point person on as you went over to Kyiv to actually first present it. We all watched what happened in the Oval Office. I guess the simple question is, can this deal be saved?
Well, David, the question is which deal, the peace deal or the economic deal? Because clearly it's very difficult to do an economic deal with a leader who doesn't want to do a peace deal. And I will tell you, I was sitting 3 away from President Trump or President Zelensky, and this has to be one of the great diplomatic own goals in history.
If Mr. Zelensky called back right now and said, I'm sorry, I want to put it back together, what would he have to do?
I don't know. Mr. Zelensky and his team were taken out of the Oval, and they kept coming back with that message, and then they left the White House, and it's going to take a lot of repair. And, you know, David, the real tragedy here, maybe things can be repaired with the administration, but I don't know how the American people are going to feel. And more importantly, the economic deal, the meeting today, the real purpose was to show that there was no daylight between the Americans and the Ukrainians. So, you know, President Trump's idea was to show that with the economic deals, to show that we're more intertwined, and that would be a symbol to the Ukrainian people, to Russian leadership, and to the American people. And President Zelensky blew that up today. I'm not sure what he was thinking.
As I say, you were the point person really for the administration on the economic deal. We all thought on the outside, we were very close. In fact, I think many of us thought there'd be a signing today, that we'd have some form of economic deal today. Were we as close as those on the outside thought? Were you surprised?
Again, I was shocked that President Zelensky would come into the Oval Office, behave like this, speak to the president, speak to the vice president, but more importantly, disrespect the American people like this. I know he's under a great deal of stress. He and I had a very heated exchange in Kyiv. I think the same thing may have happened between him and Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio in Munich. And, you know, to come in and behave like this was unacceptable. And look, I mean, what better runway did he have that President of France, Emmanuel Macron, in the Oval on Monday? Yesterday, we had a fantastic meeting with Prime Minister Keir Starmer from the UK, and then President Zelensky today. I mean, you could not have asked for a better arc. And he walked in, and I'm not sure what he was thinking.
Many of us have been in heated negotiations.
Okay, so I tend to believe, and maybe I'm being credulous, but I do tend to believe that Bessent is being rather sincere there when he expresses his shock that Zelensky approached this the way he did. Bessent is right. There was this runway that Zelensky had been gifted with, which you had 2, by all appearances, quote unquote, successful meetings with Macron and Starmer successively. And you had a situation where, look, when Trump says he wants peace, like, that's a very nice thing to say, but the devil is always in the details. So Zelensky would have lost nothing if you just said, yeah, I agree with you. I want peace. Let's do it. Like, obviously, it's going to come down to what the final negotiation is. And if the final negotiation, as all signs pointed to, was apparently going to include the deployment of NATO troops to Ukraine, that seems like it would have been pretty difficult for Putin to reconcile. So from like the pro-war, like, let's keep going perspective, all Zelensky really had to do is like play along with Trump. But I don't know, maybe he really was stressed out. Maybe he was jet lagged or something, or maybe he got some like bad political advice. It's hard to know because it was really like again, from his own standpoint, beyond catastrophic. And I guess it's possible that this minerals deal still will be signed at some point, but that's still now a very open question. Will the U.S. military funding or aid continue? Still an open question. You might have seen that a few days ago, I had an interview with Steve Bannon, and we addressed this Bessent orchestrated so-called minerals deal and discussed the implications of it. And I actually tended to agree with how Bannon characterized the implications. They were in accordance with what my intuitions would be, which is that although it's ostensibly a economic deal and doesn't explicitly commit the U.S. to any particular military outcome, it really could seen as functioning as a de facto security guarantee of a kind, and that there could have been like elements built on top of it that actually would bind the U.S. to some kind of military eventuality in Ukraine. And so, on that grounds, Bannon was denouncing the deal. And I'll play for you that clip if you didn't see it on System Update when I hosted, or on the clip that we also posted.
Well, let me ask you about the Ukraine war resolution, because there's this framework now being proposed. It's a little ambiguous, an economic partnership agreement. Bessent was in Kyiv saying that in exchange for your agreement to this partnership, U.S. aid will continue. Donald Trump himself said it's kind of haphazardly, but he did say aid could continue under this framework. It seems like this is going to be a further entanglement of the U.S. in Ukraine, and who's going to extract the rare minerals? Much of them are under Russian occupation.
My advice is walk the fuck away. I want to walk away so hard. I'm even prepared to say, okay, maybe we don't even investigate, which I think we have to, but we have to walk away. I don't want their minerals. Okay, there's enough minerals in the rest of the world.
What's the reasoning behind this proposal then? Like, why?
I think President Trump looks at Iraq and looks at other places in Afghanistan. And I think as a deal guy, he's sitting there going, look, remember in Iraq and Afghanistan,
they didn't take the oil.
The net present already didn't take the minerals in Afghanistan. The net present value of our expedition was $9 trillion. Think of what this country would be like, that if in the last 20 years we spent $9 trillion in rebuilding America. The factories we would have. What would Detroit be like? What would St. Louis be like? What would Baltimore be like? What would the great cities of the East be like? What would Detroit be like? If we spent $9 trillion on American citizens, on the soil of the United States of America, this would be a paradise. We didn't. We pissed it away and let people steal it. And so many people dead, and countries ruined, and cultures ruined, and the Christians eviscerated for $9 trillion. And I think it says in President Trump, he says, look, if these guys did it, what we should do is at least get something for it. I mean, that's the way he...
In exchange for a security guarantee, though, which could necessitate or require some kind of U.S. military action. In fact, speaking of World War II, it reminds me of the British arguably very foolishly extending Poland a so-called security guarantee that they didn't have the ability to even uphold. And then World War II gets declared once Hitler goes into Poland. Now, that's a very extreme scenario, but a security guarantee, I mean, those don't have a great record throughout history.
No, very few people understand that. The reason that World War II, which had been building in the same kind of way this is, triggered in September 1939, is because the Germans knew it, and the Germans also knew that the French and the British couldn't stand up to it, and that would give them every pretext to roll across Western Europe. They walked into a suckers play. Look, the United States of America, we're the new world. You know, our families were kicked out of these countries.
Okay, so you can go watch the full Bannon interview if you want, but you get the gist. He's opposing this so-called minerals deal, if we want to use that shorthand just to describe it, on the ground that, like I've been saying, it could function as effectively this kind of security guarantee. And so the irony of this meeting today is that Zelensky was on the precipice of codifying or formalizing the de facto security guarantee that Bannon was denouncing there. So again, if Zelensky just kept his mouth shut for another 5 minutes, the pro-Ukraine entanglement people would have gotten their way and Bannon would have lost the argument. But now who knows? Bannon may get the better of the argument. And this is more in line with what my intuitions are, I do have to say, although I don't obviously agree with Bannon on a host of issues. But on this, I think it's kind of hard to contest. Now, because Zelensky couldn't maintain like emotional control or something at this meeting, and because he flailed around with his language barrier, the Bannon side of the argument could prevail. And remember, I've been kind of trying to chronicle this a little bit over the past couple of days, but all the people who are the most hardcore pro-Ukraine kind of agitators have loved this this minerals deal, because they perceive it, probably correctly, as in fact entrenching the U.S. interest and conjoining the U.S. with Ukraine. So, like, I had a clip earlier this week of Boris Johnson endorsing it. Lindsey Graham was all in favor of it. Roger Wicker, like the most hardcore pro-Ukraine hawk types. I saw even the Wall Street Journal, which is very pro-Ukraine, like editorial board was editorializing in favor of it, et cetera, et cetera. They were saying yes, like all the like the Hudson Institute think tank people were actually Zelensky was supposed to go speak after his meeting at the White House today, but then that got canceled because everything went haywire. They were advocating for they were saying, please sign this deal now, for the love of God, please sign it. And again, for whatever went berserk inside Zelensky's brain, now it's not been signed. So he was on the cusp of doing what the pro-Ukraine war faction wanted, but getting Trump to sign off on it, which would probably placate some of the more Ukraine skeptical factions of the Republican Party. Right? Trump was even introducing like a new political argument whereby the continuation of U.S. funding and arming of Ukraine was rationalized on the ground that while Biden made a mess of things and just threw money at the problem and didn't get anything in return, now the U.S. taxpayers were getting a great deal. Trump said this several times this week. In fact, I should pull up a clip because I know there are always people who will quibble with how I characterize things that Trump has said. But he did say it. So just for the record, I am going to pull up what Trump said earlier this week. Again, this is like Zelensky had a great, again, if you're in favor of entrenching U.S. entanglements with Ukraine, Zelensky had a great setup. You had Trump kind of introducing this new political argument that seemed tailor-made to placate Ukraine skeptical Republicans because they're obviously in favor of Trump. They trust Trump's judgment. They feel like they kind of just want to defer to Trump. And here's what he was saying earlier this week.
Biden has spent $350 billion without any chance of getting it back. Now we're going to be getting all of that money back plus a lot more. And we provided a great thing. I mean, we provided something very important. And we'll be working with Ukraine. And because we'll be taking that, we're going to be taking what we're entitled to take. Now, they spent $350 billion and Europe spent $100 billion. Now, does anybody really think that's fair? But then we find out a little while ago, not so long ago, a few months ago, I found out that the money they spent, they get back. But the money we spent, we don't get back. I said, well, we're going to get it back. And we'll be able to make a deal. And again, President Zelensky is coming to sign the deal. And it's a great thing. It's a great deal for Ukraine, too, because they get us over there and we're going to be working over there. We'll be on the land. And, you know, in that way, there's sort of automatic security because nobody's going to be messing around with our people when we're there. And so we'll be there in that way. But Europe will be watching it very closely. I know that UK has said and France has said that they volunteered to put so-called peacekeepers on the site. And I think that's a good thing.
So there's Trump endorsing, number one, the concept of, he actually says so-called peacekeepers, because the implication there is correct that would be a euphemism, most likely. because peacekeeping forces deployed around the world are usually a nightmare and actually can instigate conflict as much as they can mitigate it. But that's Trump endorsing the concept of French and British, quote, peacekeepers being deployed to Ukraine. Is Putin going to accept that? Lavrov says, no way. Lukashenko was interviewed this week and commented on this prospect and said, absolutely intolerable to Russians. Others, and I think Putin might have even alluded to it as well, very skeptically and critically. So if Zelensky doesn't want a ceasefire, right? If the ceasefire that's presented to Putin comes tied with the deployment of these NATO troops, is Putin going to accept the ceasefire, or is he just going to maintain his current advantage with the incremental gains that he's making in the east of Ukraine? Don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, neither do you, but the point is it's pretty complicated. And this framework around which Trump was constructing the contours of a deal I don't think is necessarily clear that it's anywhere near as amenable to Putin as some people want to make it out to be. I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm just trying to discern as best I can here. So you had that. You had Trump saying, look, this is basically just what I have been arguing for days prior, which is that it's effectively a security guarantee. That's what Trump basically said. He said it's basically an automatic security guarantee because we're going to have our people on the land. Who exactly those people are, I don't know. That would be a good question for maybe somebody to ask Trump, but a lot of the journalists in the room don't have that level of discernment, sadly. But he's saying, yeah, this is kind of functionally a security guarantee, just as Bannon and I were talking about a couple of days prior. But maybe because Zelensky's not getting good information fed to him about like what Trump's doing or what the implications of this deal are, or a whole other variety of issues. He comes into the meeting today with a chip on his shoulder. And again, rather than just keeping his mouth shut for 5 more minutes, everything blows up. So it's pretty wild. Who knows what's going to come of it? For all the bluster, for all the theater of what went on today, I would remind people that people went absolutely berserk last week over Trump's statement that Zelensky's a dictator and so forth. And then within a matter of days, Trump retracted that more or less because he received word that Zelensky had agreed to the so-called minerals deal that Trump was trying to apply pressure to get Zelensky to sign on to. So I wouldn't rule out that all this blows over pretty soon, but it's hard to see. I mean, if you have even Lindsey Graham basically calling him out for a regime change in Ukraine, because Zelensky's poisoned the well to that degree, that's pretty weird. And look, I guess to quote one of Trump's famous sayings, we'll see what happens. Okay, so I see I do have some super chats. Somebody says, if you want to send a super chat, very nice. Go to M Tracy on YouTube. You don't have to, but hey. Somebody says, Michael, in your Bannon interview, you analogized a mineral deal with the UK guaranteeing Poland and Danzig before World War II. That's my quibble. That's stupid. Well, obviously, it's not a perfect analogy, but if you notice, Bannon agreed with the thrust of my analogy. So, but the analogy is contingent on a few things. It's contingent on the minerals deal, in fact, amounting to potentially a de facto security guarantee. And that would still have to be developed. Like, we don't know that with exact certainty. But if you read some of the language of the text of the minerals deal, for example, it says that the U.S. affirms like a sovereign and independent Ukraine and all these other things, which is why the Ukraine hawks were so enamored with the deal and are still desperate to kind of salvage whatever went on today and get it signed. And even Trump himself did say in the clip I just played that it could function as an effective security guarantee. So does the text of the agreement say the U.S. will militarily intervene in Ukraine in the event that such and such and such. No, it doesn't. But it could provide the baseline for a guarantee of that kind to potentially develop. And that's exactly what Bannon inferred from it. And I think that's a justifiable inference. So, no, the analogy with World War II is not exact. Almost no historical analogy is ever exact. The analogy rests on it being accurate that there is some form of a security guarantee being conferred to Ukraine. And if what's being conferred to Ukraine includes the deployment of NATO troops, then even if the French and British and maybe other European countries' troops are not there under an express NATO mission, they're still NATO troops, right? So they still theoretically fall under some American security umbrella. So again, a lot of this stuff is in flux, but I think you have to sometimes be forward-looking and try to discern the implications of agreements that are signed between countries, especially in the context of war. So, if you don't agree with the analogy, take it up with Steve Bannon. Let's see. Anybody else? Does anybody else have an intelligent comment? Okay, so the same guy replies, Michael, Trump literally said we will be on the land. Our commercial agents will be there. He said that's security. Well, I don't know. Who's going to be on the land? Is it going to be military contractors? Is it going to be special forces? Is it just going to be pure corporate personnel? We don't know. We don't know what that U.S. personnel presence would actually consist of. So that's a detail that would have to be hammered out, right? So, but again, if you don't agree with the potential security guarantee parallel, take it up with Bannon. People were saying stuff like this is all staged, etc. I don't know. Like, unless you have some proof of that, I don't really find that to be plausible. Like, why would this be staged? Like, because I mean, I guess the theory would be that Vance wanted to blindside Zelensky or something. But I think Vance was just kind of doing there what he has always tended to do, which is just kind of to politely interject at Trump's behest to kind of clarify something. He can often phrase things in a little bit more of an articulate, coherent way than Trump. So he's like distilling what he sees Trump is doing and then using that as a retort with the media. Actually, you know what I would like to know? Somebody should try to find out who was the journalist that asked that fairly stupid question that then set off the whole meltdown. That would be interesting. Somebody says, disaffected scientist. The blunder I simply cannot understand is going on Brett Baer hours later and digging in. He insisted he had nothing to apologize for. Poor move. Yeah, you know, I think a lot of that. So I just watched the Brett Baer thing. That was pre-scheduled. Okay, so he was going to do what Macron did. Macron, he came to DC. He had his meeting with Trump, and then he had a scheduled interview with Brett Baer on Fox because that's going to be the more Trump-friendly media outlet, and so that's like another opportunity to kind of tailor a message in alignment with Trump to the maximum extent that Macron can do. But I think, again, I guess there were parts where Zelensky was a little defiant, but he also seemed like he actually did say, I'm sorry at one point, but it just wasn't that coherent. Like, I actually don't have the clip ready. I guess I can actually pull it up. Let's maybe play some of it. Okay, yeah. So I have some. We'll watch some of that. Again, like, it's usually a good idea to watch the full thing that's being commented on, because sometimes it can add a little bit of nuance.
Speak with President Zelensky in just a moment, right here on set. But first, to set the table and give context, Zelensky and all of America in the Oval Office. Do you think you did, and do you think you owe an apology to President Trump?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for the invitation for this dialogue, and good evening to all your country, to all Americans. I'm very thankful to Americans for all your support. You did a lot. I'm thankful to President Trump and to Congress bipartisan support. And I was always very thankful from all our people. You helped us a lot from the very beginning during 3 years of full-scale invasion. You helped us to survive. Anyway, we are strategic partners. And even in such tough dialogue, and I think we have to be very honest. And we have to be very direct to understand each other, because it's very, for us, very necessary to President Trump. And I'm with all respect that he wants to finish this war, but nobody wants to finish more than we, because we in Ukraine, we are in this war, we are in this battle, and battle for freedom for our lives. So I'm just telling that I think that we have to be on the same side, and I hope that the president on our side together with us, and that is very important to stop Putin. And I heard from President Trump a lot of times that he will stop the war, and I hope he will, and we need to pressure him with Europe, with all the partners. And I think this dialogue had to be a little bit earlier to understand where we are. Like, you know, I don't remember exactly, but like President Reagan said, that peace is not just an absent the war. Yes, we're speaking about just and lasting peace, about freedom, about justice, about human rights. And that's why I said that I think so, that ceasefire, and you know, Putin, he broken 25 times ceasefire during all these years, 10 years.
So I'm not hearing from you, Mr. President, a thought that you owe the president an apology.
No, I respect President, and I respect American people. And if, I don't know, if I think that we have to be very open and very honest. And I'm not sure that we did something bad. I think maybe sometimes some things we have to discuss out of media, with all respect to democracy and to a free media. But there are things that where we have to understand the position of Ukraine and Ukrainians. And I think that is the most important thing. Yes, we are partners. You know, we are very close partners. We have to be fair. We have to be very free.
I'm told that you were told multiple times from lawmakers on Capitol Hill and the White House to make today about the minerals deal and the economic.
Okay, so there's again, I think at least part of it comes down to his lack of command of the English language. Like, there's a way there that I think a native fluent English speaker might have been able to express at least a partial apology, right? Or at least go along with what Bret Baier was kind of cajoling him into doing. But I think, you know, it takes a little bit of a nuanced command of the language. I just don't think that Zelensky necessarily has it. So that's a big impediment. Yeah, so because he seems like he's trying to be conciliatory, right? But he's also trying to maintain maybe his position to some extent. But like, you need a robust command of the English language to convey that in a way that I think would have done what he was setting out to do in this interview. So watch a little bit more.
Deal, and then get it signed and let negotiations play out over security guarantees step by step. Is that true?
I said that we have to sign this document, and we are ready for this. And this will be the first step to security guarantees. But it's not enough. I think so. Maybe I don't know something. I don't know some details. That's why I wanted to share it with the president, my thoughts, and to hear him. Again, because he has a plan how to stop Putin. And maybe, as I said, maybe it's out of big conversations, but we have to share it. You know, this is so sensitive, you know, just.
So, I mean, I guess part of me wonders, like, does Zelensky comprehend here that he could have just said, you know, I really regret how things went today. I feel like we can resolve like a miscommunication and we can work forward on a constructive partnership and do the perfunctory, you know, play the role that's being beckoned of him by Brett Baer here. But again, I wonder if like I wouldn't be able to do that in any language other than English. Even if I did more Duolingo on Spanish, I would have said like "No me gusto" or I don't know. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty tough position to be in, just by the language barrier, especially if you're dealing with a very pressurized sort of dynamic where you have to artfully walk a fine line in how you express things.
A ceasefire without security guarantees. This is so sensitive for our people. I'm speaking like a president of a people who are in this struggle 3 years, and they just want to hear that America on our side and that America will stay with us, not with Russians, with us. That's it. But I'm sure that it will be. This is the first step to security guarantees. Europeans, we don't need to lose them. They are good allies for the United States. The United States is the most or the biggest donator of support and of peace. But we don't need to lose Europe. And they also want to know next steps. We have to be very open to understand how to stop the war.
Right. But do you think the public spat in the Oval Office in front of the media served Ukrainians well today?
I think this kind of spat is I mean this this is not good for both sides anyway, and I very open, but I can't change our Ukrainian attitude to Russian, and I don't want they kill us for us. This is very, very clear that Americans are the best of our friends, Europeans are the best of our friends, and Putin with Russian.
Okay, so I keep coming back to this point, but like I just can't help but wonder if he had a better command of the Ukrainian language, would he of the English language rather? Maybe I don't have a good grasp of the language. Would he grasp that he doesn't have to make any kind of concession about Ukrainians' attitudes toward Russia to acknowledge that the meeting today went seriously awry? So I don't know, like maybe it would be interesting to see if like you could do over all of today's events in his native language and see if it went better. I don't know, because he's not really addressing the issue. He's kind of going on tangents and stuff, right?
They are enemies, and it doesn't mean that we don't want peace. We just want to recognize the reality, the real situation.
President Trump is convinced that you will never sign a deal with Vladimir Putin. Is he right?
No, I think so. What I think, Ukraine wants peace, and we will have.
Just look what he says there. No, I think so. What I think. So he's asking, is President Trump right? First he says no, and then he says, I think so. And then I guess he's trying to say, here's what I think. So it's pretty muddled.
We will have, anyway, diplomacy. We will have negotiations. I only said that I think so. It's about just and lasting peace. It means that we have to be very strong at the table of negotiations. And at these negotiations, Ukraine and Russia, like sides of this war, have to be, and the United States and Europe. That's what I said. So we are ready for peace, but we have to be in strong position. What does it mean? Just to know that our army is strong, that our partners with us, and that we have security guarantees. Am I not right?
Leaving the White House today, President Trump said this.
He's looking to go on and fight. He wants to come back right now, but I can't do that.
What do you make of that? Do you want to continue fighting? Do you want peace? And if he had the opportunity to go back to the White House right now, would you do it?
No. First of all, we want peace. That's why I'm in the United States. That's why I visited President Trump. And
So why didn't he just say at the White House meeting, yes, we want peace, of course, Mr. President, etc., and then go sign the deal, the minerals deal that all the most hardcore Ukraine hawks were agitating for and were thrilled that Trump was giving some kind of political cover to be signed, because if he's in favor of it, then that's going to lessen opposition among Ukraine skeptical elements of the Republican coalition, who probably would have been in a firestorm if Biden had proposed a so-called deal of that kind.
thanks for invitation again. The deal on minerals is the first step to security guarantees. It's meant for the peace, closer to peace. That's why I'm here. And we have tough situation. To understand it is to be in Ukraine. You saw it, Brad. You was once. Thank you again. So I think that's very important to understand what's going on. But I respect my soldiers and our people, our civilians who work and support our warriors. I can't say just stop. Nobody will stop, because everybody afraid that Putin will come back tomorrow. We want just and lasting peace. It's true. We want security guarantees. We raise this topic about NATO the quickest way, but not all the countries are on this side. I said, okay, if not NATO, nobody is pushing. If not NATO, let's build NATO in Ukraine. That's my position. Europeans are ready or to have contingents on our territory, boots on the ground. United States thinks maybe to help, maybe USA backstop, have to be just to guarantee that they are with Europeans. Look at Europe, it's strong. It became stronger, but they also want to have allies like the United States. That's what I said. I just want to understand what the peace. It's not my question, Brad. This is the question from all our people.
You mentioned when I traveled to the front lines with you last year.
Okay, so it goes on basically along those lines. So there you have it. No, he didn't give. Actually, you know what? I should pull that back up, because there is a part where I think he does kind of apologize.
Ukrainians survived. Of course. And
So do you regret that? Are you?
Here we go.
I think that if journalists asking questions to president, with all respect to vice president, I mean, he has his interview.
Mr.
This is
President, shouldn't this dynamic, if you're going to be like this, be behind closed doors, not?
Of course. And
so do you regret that? Are you regretting that happened today?
Regretting? Yes, I think it was not good. I think it was not good, because we had a lot of different dialogues. I'm always open to media, but there are very sensitive things. I just want to be honest, and I just want our partners to understand the situation correctly. And I want to understand everything correctly. That's about us. Not to lose our friendship.
Okay, so there he does give a semi-apology, I guess. He says he regrets it, but if you'll notice, he has to ask his translator to tell him what regret means, which, to beat a dead horse with the point I've been making, it doesn't speak very well of his command of the English language, especially its nuances and intricacies, which is probably pretty important in this kind of diplomatic context. So I think that probably was a bigger factor here than maybe some people appreciate, but who knows? Okay, so somebody asked me, Klaus, I worry this could increase. This is a super chat. I worry this could increase the frenzy in Europe, and in the long run, make EU continue the proxy war, I guess, and at some point bring the U.S. to the conflict. Well, that's actually not a bad point. Like, if some EU countries now get desperate, like if France and the UK take it upon themselves to actually deploy a force like this, doesn't seem practical in the short term, but I guess you never know. I mean, they do have some semblance of standing armies. And it wouldn't take like a massive force, right, to make a big splash, let's say. I think between France and the UK and maybe some of the Eastern European countries, what, they couldn't assemble like 20 or 30,000 troops or something? They probably could if they decided that that's what they were going to do. And there is like a big emergency European Council meeting on March 6th. Who knows what'll come of that? A lot of these European Council meetings, even though they're like declared for emergency reasons, don't seem to amount to a whole lot. But I guess it's possible that if certain European countries perceive that there's like this big, desperate situation that they have to act dramatically now in response to, which I'm not sure is actually quite the case, but if that's their perception, then I think this guy Klaus could be right. The commenter, like maybe, like if I don't know, Poland or Bulgaria or some other country, along with Britain and France, who are more, or even Germany, because they just had the federal election. The CDU party has their chancellor now coming in, Merz, who's actually more hard line on Ukraine than Scholz. Even though the AfD, which is more Ukraine skeptical, got in second place, but by all appearances, it looks like the more bellicose chancellor is going to come to power. So if some NATO assemblage decides to take some more dramatic action, could that end up roping the U.S. into something as the main power in the NATO bloc? It's not a bad thought. Paz says, I understand Trump proposed owning one half of the port of Odessa in perpetuity. That makes the security like when the mob takes half your business. I don't know. Did Trump specify the port of Odessa? I mean, the economic partnership agreement, so-called, does include port infrastructure as something that the U.S. will now have partial ownership over the future revenues of. So who knows? Full Code says, I don't think he needs to apologize. He was put on the spot. It was a 19th century style. It was a 19th century colonial style deal, but it doesn't matter as it wasn't legal anyway. Yeah, I mean, I struggle. I often don't like repairing to like jargony type terms and descriptions for things. Like, I often think that's kind of like a lazy shortcut. Like, people often latch to certain terminology as like an analytical shortcut to avoid fully assessing what it is they're trying to describe. Like, this or that is imperialism, this or that is colonialism, this or that is genocide or racism or whatever. I mean, I'm making maybe an overbroad point, but like, I just feel like there are some lazy shortcuts with how language is used. Breaking news. However, if the term colonization means anything in the 21st century, you got to think that this is at least in the ballpark in terms of what was being proposed with Ukraine. Like, give me how you would describe this economic so-called partnership deal. The U.S. acquiring under like a form of duress Ukrainian state-owned assets and physical infrastructure. In exchange, pledging to finance Ukraine. I don't know, like, what term is most apt. If anybody has suggestions, I'm open to hearing them. But like, it seems if we want to use a term, colony is like within the realm of possibility. And then as to whether it's legal, like I actually had a thought about this myself. It sure seems like the scope of this deal that now may be aborted, maybe signed in the future, who knows, was supposed to be signed today, but then Zelensky had his mental meltdown. The scope of this deal certainly seems sweeping enough to me that it very easily could, or perhaps should, qualify for a Senate ratified treaty. Like, it's not very clear that this should be within the unilateral remit of the executive. If the U.S. is going to be committing itself to financing Ukraine in perpetuity, a country that's at war, like that seems a little odd, but who knows the precise legalities of it. Disaffected scientist says, yeah, I agree there, Michael. If we're going to do this, the Congress needs to be involved. Well, don't hold your breath for that, because I severely doubt that there are going to be very many Republicans with the political appetite to assert their constitutional prerogatives on this or really many other subjects, given Trump's dominant political position at the moment, especially with regard to House Republicans with whom he has the most sway. So I'm sure there will be hearings and stuff, but in terms of actually exerting some power over whether the deal can be implemented, I don't see that coming. All right, everybody. I hope this was somewhat helpful or interesting or edifying for at least some of you. If you missed my interview, go to mtracy.net and subscribe there. I just put out a post today that does a little synopsis of this meeting today, and then has links to a bunch of the interviews that I did over the past couple days or last weekend at CPAC. I think a bunch of them are interesting. Probably, picking and probing at certain angles with regard to like intra right-wing factionalism that maybe don't get probed that much. Like interviewing the AfD, which went on to place second in the German federal elections, and the Polish Law and Justice Party about one another. And they're both, broadly speaking, right-wing European parties, but they really don't like each other. And if you happen to watch the System Update show on Monday and Tuesday, I played some fairly lengthy clips of these interviews, but the full interviews now have been posted, and they contain some material that wasn't in the clips that aired on the show. So you can go to System Update on Rumble or YouTube, or go to my my site, mtracy.net, where I posted a list of all the interviews. Somebody says, please do a buddy picture with Steve Bannon. Hey, I'm open to it. People were saying there's never been a more disheveled meeting of the minds when I had my historic summit with him. I'll take that. I'll accept that. I'll accept that in good fun and humor. But yeah, he can certainly talk. And, in fairness to Steve Bannon, he does mix it up. I mean, he'll talk to anybody. It seems like he was on a New York Times podcast. I haven't got it served on YouTube recently that he did like a big public debate with Bernard-Henri Lévy. He'll debate anyone, it seems. So he has, at least you can, in a sense, the courage of his convictions. There were definitely more antagonistic journalists coming up to him at CPAC. I guess I might have some antagonism toward him, but I kind of wanted to flesh out certain things and not just like scream, "Why are you a Nazi?" Blah 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 blah. Like, that's not really that illuminating. All right, go take a look at that stuff. And thanks, everybody. We'll do it again in the not too distant future. Bye-bye.